Prague off the beaten track. Pohanka takes you away from the crowds to the city's hidden gems.
Hello and welcome to Prague off the beaten track. In today's episode we are heading to a place that I think even many locals know only by name, if at all. Tucked away between Břevnov and Petřiny in Prague 6, Kajetánka is one of those quiet green corners of the city that hide, I think, fascinating stories behind their walls. Once home to vineyard and a small monastery, today it's a peaceful park and a restaurant offering a perfect escape from the city's rush. So, why is Kajetánka interesting? The story goes back to the 17th century when the area was covered in vineyards owned by the Benedictine monks from Prague Castle. In 1628, the estate was bought by Countess of the Martinitz family. She and her husband, Bernard Ignác Martinitz, supported the founding of a small Marian chapel that I will mention later, and also a monastery run by the Theatine order, known in Czech as the Kajetáni, which gave the place its name. Kajetánka soon became a popular pilgrimage site, but during the reign of Emperor Joseph II, the monastery was abolished in 1783 as part of religious reforms. The following centuries saw Kajetánka gradually transformed. In the 19th century, the estate's new owners built a kind of English-style garden with a pond, giving the place its romantic parkland feel, which it, keeps still today. At the start of the 20th century, it was bought by Jan Kolátor, who was a mayor of nearby Břevnov. After 1948, the estate was nationalized under the communist rule, and it was actually given to the city to administer it. Kajetánka, like many similar places, was neglected and fell into disrepair during the decades that followed, and it wasn't until after 1989, when the communist regime fell, that the area started to recover, with major revitalization efforts launched, especially in 2011. Today, thanks to that restoration, Kajetánka combines, for me at least, history, peaceful green spaces, and a kind of small chateau, it can be called like that, or villa, offering visitors a glimpse of Prague's layered past, just a few steps from the city's main tourist routes. So now I've just walked up to the restored Villa Kajetánka. I should really put this straight. It's not a chateau, it's a villa. And unfortunately it's closed. There's a sign in the window, helpfully, in both Czech and English, saying that the restaurant is currently under revitalization. Well, it's not abandoned. Actually, from the outside, where I stand now, the villa looks well maintained and cared for. But according to the sign, it's available for private and corporate events, even though it's closed to the general public. So, obviously, you can have a wedding, celebration, and that sort of thing here. There's a phone number, by the way, and an email listed, but clearly it's not that you could just walk in as a member of a public for a coffee or a glass of wine right now. Well, that said, it doesn't feel neglected at all. It looks like it's only been closed quite recently, so instead of stopping for a drink, I decided to wander around the park itself. It's not huge, frankly. It's not very big. I mean, especially if you compare it to other places like the Dívčí hrady or the Girls' Castles or Kunratický les, the Kunratice forest that I talked about in some of the previous episodes. But it definitely has its charm. It's kind of cozy and has a tucked away feel. There's a small pond, some quiet paths, just enough trees to make you feel that you've left the city behind, even though you can hear the sound of the traffic. I think it's a kind of place where you can really slow down for a bit and enjoy a quieter, more peaceful side of Prague. As I'm walking along one of the paths, I see some statues they are statues of women, and they are quite nice. Unfortunately, there is no sign explaining who is the author, but they, after all, are here, to please your eye, which, at least for me, they definitely do. And I think this is a good time to tell you a little bit about the kind of nutritional history of Prague, because for centuries, estates like Kajetánka played definitely an important role in feeding Prague's population. They were located just outside the city walls, and such villas, estates, vineyards and small farms provided fresh produce, obviously, grapes for wine, fruit, vegetables, dairy products, and even fish from nearby ponds. I think you can hear some of that background noise behind me. Obviously, there are, grandparents with their kids. So it just gives you, a little bit of a flavor of what kind of park this is. Really a family place. But back to the history of feeding Prague. So monasteries like Břevnov, which is nearby, brewed even beer and supply the city's markets. So these green areas that we can still see today weren't just ornamental, they were very practical, productive spaces that helped sustain both Prague's elite and its growing population. This local supply model, however, began to change, quite understandably, during the Industrial Revolution. As Prague's population expanded rapidly in the 19th century, small estates on the city's edge could no longer meet the demands of urban markets. So foodstuffs increasingly arrived from across Bohemia and Moravia, and internationally transported by rail and road. Large-scale agriculture elsewhere began replacing the smaller traditional production on these villa farms. Still, estates like Kajetánka, though losing their economic role in feeding the city, remained in private or religious hands and were usually well maintained as residential, sometimes recreational, and leisure properties. That stability definitely ended after the communist takeover in 1948. Like many such properties, Kajetánka was nationalized, while agriculture was collectivized across the countryside. Former villa estates within city limits were often left neglected and repurposed. Kajetánka's once carefully maintained park and buildings fell into disrepair over the following decades, a fate, common to many historical estates across the country. And it was only with the return of private ownership after the fall of communism, and also, I have to say, keen interest in historical preservation, especially by young local people, that places like Kajetánka began to recover. So today, after the major restoration that I mentioned, Kajetánka serves as this peaceful public park and event venue. And I think it's not exaggerated to say that its story kind of mirrors that of many Prague estates, from productive agricultural land to ornamental residence, through communist-era neglect, and finally to quiet revival as part of the city's green heritage. Now, I should explain that while Kajetánka and its surrounding park are fenced and accessible daily from 6 a.m. until midnight, there's another green space directly attached to it that's entirely open and unfenced. And it also has a playground for kids, and it's called actually officially Malovanka. And this adjacent park might feel like an extension of Kajetánka, but it has its own history. The name Malovanka actually comes from a nearby homestead, another homestead dating back to at least 17th century, and just like Kajetánka, it was originally part of the patchwork of vineyards and gardens and small farm estates. So today, Malovanka is a quiet open park surrounded by modern residential buildings, but quite tasteful, I have to say. I wonder how much it costs to get a property here. It will be one of the more expensive places in Prague, I believe. And to complete this story, I should mention another place which is closely linked to this area, and that is Petinka, whose name actually comes from the German name Pöttingen, the original owner of the estate that stood here. This estate also had its own vineyards and fields, much like Kajetánka and Malovanka, but its story also includes a more recent history, because in the 1980s, Petinka was known as a popular student club where young people from across Prague would come for concerts and cultural events. Today, most of these buildings that were historically here are gone, but the name Petinka still marks this corner of Prague 6, and it's a name of a street. So, for now, I think that's all about Kajetánka and its quiet neighbors, Malovanka, Petinka, and I should mention also the small chapel of Our Lady of Alterting, which was beautifully restored, which you can find in one of the corners of the park. As I walked around, I have to say I passed only a few people out walking their dogs, or maybe just taking a shortcut, because people can walk through the park, obviously from one part of Prague 6 to another. So if you're in the mood for something simple, a stroll, a bit of green space, maybe even a small picnic, Kajetánka could be just the spot. If you want to find yourself somewhere quiet and enjoy a break from the tourist crowds. And as always, if you'd like to find some practical tips, a map, or see some photos of what it looks like here, just head to the website of Radio Prague International and look for Prague Off the Beaten Track. You'll find everything you need to plan your visit.
Prague Off the Beaten Track. Vít Bohanka takes you away from the crowds to the city's hidden gems.